Celeste Hebert was 22 years old, and she had a voice that made grown men in a bayou dance hall set down their beers to listen. On a Saturday night in late August of 1993, she sang her last set at Landry's Hall in the little town of Bon Secours, deep in the cane and cypress country of South Louisiana, and a little after midnight, she walked out into the warm dark to go home to her mother. She never made it the half-mile down the bayou road. That is not a story about a small-town girl who ran off to chase the bright lights, the way the gossip would have it for 33 years. That is a story about a man the whole parish loved, a kid of evidence that sat sealed and untested in a sheriff's storeroom for 3 decades, and a database that finally spoke a name no one in Bon Secours was prepared to hear. It would take a strand of DNA, the science to read it, and the will to finally pull that kid off the shelf to bring it into the light. But before we get to the arrest that shocked an entire parish in 2026, you have to go back to that August, and you have to understand who Celeste Hebert was. Because to feel what was stolen, you first have to hear her sing. Bon Secours, Louisiana, in 1993, was a town the Bayou raised and the Catholic Church kept. It sat at the end of a parish road in Bellefleur, 1,100 souls, where the old folks still spoke French at the supper table, and the young ones understood it without being able to answer back. Saturday nights meant the fées doo-doo at Landry's, where the accordion and the fiddle pulled the whole town in off the dark roads, and Sunday mornings meant Mass, and everybody went to both and saw no contradiction in it. The air smelled of fried boudin and cut cane and the green rot of the swamp, and on summer nights the cicadas were so loud you had to lean in close to talk. People left their screen doors unlatched. They knew each other's grandmother's maiden names. Nothing bad happened in Bon Secours, or so the town told itself, right up until the August it did. Celeste was the kind of girl a town keeps as its own. She'd been raised by her mother, Odette, in a little house on stilts at the edge of the water, after her father drowned working a shrimp boat when Celeste was small. She waited tables at Landry's 6 nights a week, carrying trays of cold long necks and crawfish through the crowd, and on the 7th she sang. People drove in from 3 parishes over to hear her, that low, aching swamp pop voice that didn't seem like it should come out of so slight a girl. When she opened her mouth, the dancers would slow and the talkers would hush, and old men who'd buried wives would have to look at the floor. She wore a pair of red dancing shoes she'd saved 2 months of tips to buy, and she kept her late grandmother's rosary in the pocket of her apron, and she fussed over her mother's bad heart like a woman twice her age, driving her to the doctor in Lafayette and counting out her pills into the little plastic box. That August she had something new, something that scared her and lit her up at once. A club owner in Lafayette had heard her sing one Saturday night and offered her a standing spot. Real money, a real start. The first rung of the only ladder she'd ever wanted to climb. She'd told her mother she'd send for her once she was settled, and she'd cried a little saying it, because she had never spent a night away from that house on stilts. On the last ordinary night of her life, Celeste finished her set to a haul on its feet, kissed her mother's photo she kept by the till, and walked out into the heat to go home. That was the last time anyone in Bon Secours heard Celeste Hebert sing. Odette waited up, the way she always did on a Saturday. What the records would later establish is plain and unbearable. Celeste worked the floor until closing, sang her final set a little before midnight, and stayed behind to help wipe down the tables and stack the chairs the way she always did. She left Landry's on foot a little after 12:30, the way she did most nights, because the house was only down the Bayou Road, and somebody almost always rolled past to offer her a lift the last dark stretch by the water. By 1 in the morning, Odette was on the porch with the bug light on, listening past the cicadas for footsteps on the shell drive. By 2, she had walked the half-mile to the hall herself, where the lights were out and the chairs were already up on the tables. By dawn, half of Bon Secours was strung out along the Bayou Road and the Cane headlands, calling her name into the mist coming off the water. It was 3 days before a man running his crawfish traps deep in the swamp found her. The coroner's findings ended the gossip before it could start. Celeste had not run off to Lafayette. She had been killed the night she vanished, within sight of the road she walked every night of her life. And the evidence the coroner recovered, biological evidence, the kind a person leaves behind only in a struggle, was carefully collected, sealed into a kit, labeled in a steady hand, and carried back to the Bellefleur Parish Sheriff's Office, where it would sit in a cardboard box on a steel shelf, untested and all but forgotten, for the next 33 years. The case fell to Detective Alphonse Cormier, a soft-spoken parish man everyone called Al, who had known Celeste since she was a girl singing in the church choir, and who would carry her file for the rest of his life. In those first weeks, Al did the work the parish could afford. He interviewed the band, the bartender, the regulars, the men who'd lined the bar that Saturday night. He looked hard at a man from out of parish who'd been at the hall that night, a roughneck who'd had too much and gotten too close to Celeste on the dance floor and been turned down flat. Al chased him for a month before a timesheet from an offshore rig put him in the Gulf the whole weekend. He looked at an old boyfriend who fell apart with grief in the interview room and turned out to have been 2 parishes away at his cousin's wedding. He even looked, briefly, at a drifter the church had been feeding that summer, until the man's whereabouts were vouched for by the priest himself. One by one the doors closed, and the one piece of evidence that could have opened any of them, the sealed kit on the shelf with a stranger's Dina waiting inside it, could not be tested. Because in 1993 a small Louisiana parish had no money for it, and no lab that would take it, and the backlog of untested evidence across the whole state ran into the thousands of boxes. Al asked for it to be processed. He asked more than once, and put it in writing, and was told each time that there was no funding and no lab time and a long line ahead of him. The waiting became years, and the years became the case, and a profile that could have ended it all in a single afternoon sat in the dark gathering dust. While Al worked the official side, Odette lived the other one. She kept the porch light burning every night for a year. She walked to the hall on Saturdays and stood at the back while the new girl sang until she couldn't bear it anymore and stopped going at all. And here is the cruelty that the town would only understand much later. The man who organized the benefit dance to raise money for the search, the man who played the saddest, sweetest fiddle anyone had ever heard at Celeste's funeral mass, the man who held Odette's hands in both of his and wept and called Celeste the daughter the good Lord never gave him, that man was beloved by every soul in Bon Secours. He had taught Celeste her phrasing. He had given her rides home down the Bayou Road more times than anyone could count. Nobody looked at him twice, because nobody in the parish could imagine looking at him at all. The official conclusion, in the end, was the worst kind of nothing. An unsolved homicide. A girl everyone mourned. A killer the parish assumed must have been a stranger passing through, because the alternative was unthinkable. By 1998, 5 years had gone. By 2003, 10, Al Cormier made his rounds and ran down every fresh rumor and got nowhere, and the kit stayed on its shelf. When he retired in 2007, he did a strange thing for a retired man. He kept visiting the evidence room. Once or twice a year he'd sign in, walk back to the shelf, and just stand a while with the box that had Celeste's name on it, as if to remind the building it was still there. That girl's still waiting, he'd tell the young clerks, who hadn't been born when she died. Don't you let anybody throw her out. The family never let Celeste become a rumor. Odette refused, to her last breath, to let anyone call her daughter a runaway in her hearing. She kept Celeste's red shoes on top of the dresser and the grandmother's rosary wound around the bedpost. Celeste's younger sister, Marie, who had been 14 the August it happened, grew up into the keeper of the flame. She gave the interviews when a reporter came around on the anniversaries. She pushed the parish. She wrote letters to the state asking the question nobody would answer. Why had the evidence never been tested? She married and raised children of her own in the same little town, and every August she put fresh flowers at the spot on the Bayou Road where her sister was last seen walking home. She never knew, for 33 years, that she had also put them, more than once, into the hands of the man who killed her. Because Roy Mountain always came to the memorial, fiddle case in hand, to play. Every case we bring you is the work of weeks spent in coroner's records, court files, and the lives of families who waited decades to be heard. If you want us to keep telling the stories of people the world sealed in a box and left on a shelf, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what keeps these cases from gathering dust. Now, let's get back to Celeste. In 2026, the state of Louisiana finished what it had started years before. A sweeping effort to test every neglected kit of evidence still sitting in the storerooms of its parishes, thousands of them. Each one a case somebody had given up on. Each one a person somebody had loved. The box with Celeste Burt's name went to a lab in Baton Rouge, and for the first time in 33 years, the evidence inside it was red. The lab built a full DNA profile of the man who had struggled with Celeste the night she died, and they ran it through CODIS. Here is the thing that simply did not exist in 1993. A national computer system that holds the DNA profiles of millions of people who have been arrested or convicted, alongside the unknown profiles pulled from unsolved crime scenes, all of them searching against one another quietly in the background, day and night, year after year. A killer can walk free for decades, certain the trail has gone cold, and then one ordinary arrest for one ordinary offense puts his DNA into that system, and a crime he thought was buried 30 years deep suddenly has his name written all over it. That is exactly what happened in Bon Secours. The profile from Celeste's kit came back to a single man whose own DNA had quietly entered the database years earlier, after a conviction for something else entirely. A man who had no idea that the swab taken from the inside of his cheek that day had just signed the end of his life as he knew it. Detective Sergeant Vanessa Rowe of the Louisiana State Police Cold Case Unit got the notification on a flat gray morning, read the name attached to it, and pulled the old file to be sure she understood what she was looking at. She did. Then she drove 2 hours south to a small house at the edge of Bon Secours, where Al Cormier, 80 now, was sitting on his porch shelling pecans into a tin bowl. She didn't have to say much. He saw her badge and the folder under her arm, and he stopped shelling. When she told him the name, the old man went very still, and then he set the bowl down on the boards beside him with great care, as though it might break, and he said, he played at her funeral. I stood 10 feet from that man, and I watched him play, and I cried right along with everybody else. Rowe drove out to see Marie that same afternoon. Marie did not scream, and she did not collapse. Her mother had taught her how to hold steady through anything. She only asked the question that had been sitting inside her for 33 years. Did we let him into our house? Rowe told her the truth. They had. Many times. His name was Roy Mountain, and in 1993, he had been the fiddle player and band leader at Landry's Hall, 31 years old then, married. A man the whole parish would have sworn on the gospel was the gentlest soul in Bellefleur. He played at every wedding and every funeral for 40 years. He led the music at midnight mass. He gave free lessons to any child whose family couldn't pay. And he had taken Celeste Habert under his wing, taught her how to hold a note and work a room, and driven her home down the Bayou Road on 100 dark nights, until the night she told the band she was leaving for Lafayette, and the rides, and Bon Secours, and all of them behind. He was the last person to see her walk out the door. Looking back, the parish would find the small things it had been unable to see. The way Roy had been the loudest to insist the killer must have been a stranger, an outsider, someone passing through. The way his interest in Celeste's career had had an edge to it that a few of the older women had noticed and said nothing about. Because what was there to say about a man so kind? The way he'd grown quiet and gray the year she died, and thrown himself into the church music like a man doing penance. The Dina that finally named him had gone into the system. Investigators learned, after an arrest in his 60s for an assault during a drunken quarrel. The one and only time in his long, respectable life that the law had ever taken his fingerprints and his cheek swab. And the moment, though no one knew it then, that sealed his fate. None of the rest had ever been enough, when the man you would have to suspect was the man playing the Ave Maria over the very grave he'd filled. But the Dina was enough. There was no innocent reason on earth for it to be where it was found. The arrest came on a bright, still morning, at the tidy house where Roy Mountain had lived for half a century. He was 64 now, a church-going grandfather, a man with a town's worth of love banked against him. He came to the door with his reading glasses pushed up on his head. He did not run. The detective said he looked at them for a long moment, and then passed them at the bayou, and said only, "I always thought the music would make up for it." When the news reached Bon Secours, the parish simply went silent. People stood in the aisle of the Pas Casac, holding their po-boys, and could not move, and the phones along the Bayou Road rang one house to the next, with nobody quite able to say the words out loud. The man who played at her funeral, the man who taught their children, the man whose fiddle had carried half the town to its graves and weddings for 40 years. The shock curdled within a day into a grief and a rage the parish had never known. Because Roy Moton had not only taken Celeste, he had stood over her casket, and played, and accepted their tears, and let an entire town thank him for his sorrow for 33 years. Late in 2026, Roy Moton was convicted of the murder of Celeste Burt, and the court said plainly what Bon Secours already understood, that he had silenced the most beautiful voice the parish ever produced, and then made a career of mourning her. Al Cormier was in the front row of the courtroom, an old man who had outlasted his own despair. Marie sat beside him. Odette did not live to see it. She died in 2011, with the porch light still burning and her daughter still officially unavenged. And that is the wound with no balm. That the mother who refused for 18 years to let anyone call her girl a runaway went to her grave still waiting. But after the verdict, Marie did something the whole town came out for. Years before, a friend of Celeste's had recorded one of her Saturday sets on a little cassette and given it to Odette, who had been unable to bear playing it. Marie had kept it all this time. And on a Saturday evening that fall, they opened the doors of the old Landry's Hall one more time, and they played that cassette through the speakers, and the whole parish stood in the dark and listened to Celeste Habert sing for the first time in 33 years. I want to leave you with Celeste as she was, and not as that Bayou Road left her. A 22-year-old girl in red dancing shoes with her grandmother's rosary in her apron pocket, who looked after her mother's failing heart, who saved her tips for a pair of shoes and a shot at something bigger, and who could quiet a whole rowdy dance hall with the first low note of a song. She kissed her mother's photo and walked out into the warm Louisiana night to go home, the way she had 1,000 times. Justice took 33 years, a box that should have been opened decades sooner, and a database no one in 1993 had imagined, but it came. The truth a beloved man believed he had carried to the bottom of a swamp had been sitting the whole time on a steel shelf in his own parish, sealed in a kit with her name on it, waiting only for the world to find the will to read it. So I'll leave you with the questions I can't stop turning over. Was justice truly done when the man who killed Celeste got to live 33 free years as the parish's beloved fiddle player, and her mother died still fighting to clear her name? What does it say about us that the evidence that finally convicted him sat untested on a shelf for 3 decades, in a box that nobody could find the money to open? And how many other such boxes are still sitting on shelves across this country tonight, each one holding a name that only the science of today can finally speak? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one. Celeste Haypert waited 33 years for the truth to come up out of that swamp. Stories like hers are the reason this channel exists, because no one who was loved should stay a rumor forever, and no kindness, however convincing, should be allowed to bury a crime. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, or how beloved the man who hid it, subscribe, and you'll find more solved cold cases waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.